Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on financing waste management infrastructure. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We might have some more people joining us shortly. I think we can go to the next slide, please. So just a quick note before we kick off. First of all, to say welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for today's session. We will first of all be presenting a few slides, a bit of information, and then at the end we will have some time for Q&A. So please do feel free to post your questions into the chat box during the session, and then we'll have time to take those at the end. And then also just to flag that this session is being recorded, so please adjust accordingly. Thank you. I think we can go to the next slide. And then for today's session, we'll first of all have some introductions to the people we have on the webinar. We'll introduce some of the context for today's session, and then we will dive into the topic of financing plastic action. And then we'll have a case study hearing from Taka Taka Solutions about their plastic project. Then we'll have, as I said, some time for Q&A before closing. So we can go to the next slide, please. So to introduce everybody, we'll have myself. So I'm Emily Devonport. I'm a managing consultant in the circular economy team at South Pole. I'm based in Italy, and I'll be a speaker and also a panelist in today's session. And I'm joined here by Daniel from Taka Taka Solutions. If you want to introduce yourself, Daniel.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Great, thank you. So Daniel and I will be presenting in today's session, and then we'll be joined by my colleagues Nicole and Irene for the Q&A session later today. Thanks, Irene and Nicole. So we all know who we all are now. Great. So just to quickly introduce South Pole as well. South Pole is an environmental consultancy that's working on innovative sustainability solutions around the world. So working on diverse topics from climate to water, plastic and wider sustainability. We're also working on financing action and sustainable solutions with the public and private sector, and we're based in 30 offices around the world with a diverse team of experts. Go to the next slide, thanks. Within our circular economy team, we're also working with various initiatives around plastics and the circular economy. So South Pole is an endorsing signatory of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we're also a founding advisory member of the 3R initiative, which was the co-author of the guidelines for leadership in accounting, in corporate plastic accounting. Our team is currently also a co-chair of the Plastics and Packaging Workstream from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and we're on the scientific committee and a secretariat member of the Plastic Footprint Network, working on plastic footprint methodologies. So I think we can continue. Thank you. So diving into our topic today of financing plastic action, why we're here, why we should do it, and where do we go from here. So to start us off, we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. I think we're all aware, and we've all have seen in the past decade, we've seen a lot more research, analysis, and reports showing us more and more information about how our current production and use and disposal of plastics is unsustainable, that it's causing significant impacts on the environment, on the economy, on society, and that we can now really see those effects in marine life, also now human health. And so that information is becoming increasingly available, and the impacts are becoming increasingly clear, and therefore the urgency to work on the topic of plastics is also increasingly apparent. So we can move to the next slide, please. When we think about how we got here, well, it's clear that plastics in general has been perceived as a revolutionary material mostly because of its functionality. Its ability to be lightweight, flexible, hygienic has allowed it to really be used in a myriad amount of ways, providing some different benefits. For example, it can have lower greenhouse gas emissions than aluminium or glass. It can extend the shelf life so we can avoid food waste. However, as we also know, there is a really significant problem in terms of what we do with that plastic and how it's managed. And so if we move to the next slide, we'll see that from the amount of plastic that has ever been produced, so around 8.3 gigatons of plastic since the 1950s, only around 9% has been recycled. So we know that there's still a long way to go, the majority of plastics still ending up in landfill, in nature, or being incinerated. So if we move to the next slide, thanks. And when we think about the plastics problem, we also have different ways to envisage or to consider this. So this report from Environmental Action that came out earlier this year to identify Plastic Overshoot Day shows us the date when the generation of plastic waste exceeds the capacity of the waste management systems to cope with that plastic. So we can really clearly see that our current waste management capacity is not enough to deal with the whole volume of plastic that we generate and plastic waste. So it's really a two-ended problem. There's too much and it's not being managed. And we can see here that the Plastic Overshoot Day for 2023 was actually already in July, so around 3 months ago. And we're now somewhere between the overshoot days for Italy and China at this point in time. So if we move to the next slide, please. We can start to think about what we need and where do we go from here. So we clearly need a systems rethink and thinking how we reduce unnecessary plastics. And moving to the next slide, we also see that we need a global recycling system to help us close the gap on other plastics in use and plastics waste. But the big question as we build anything new is really how do we get there and who funds it. So this brings us nicely to our topic of today of how we take action on plastics and who takes action on plastics. We really believe that addressing global plastic pollution requires all hands on deck and everyone thinking about how to take that action. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that we at South Pole usually encourage organizations seeking to act to really think about these 5 key steps in any plastic or circular strategy. So starting first with measuring and understanding the plastic that the company is using or producing and how that plastic is being managed or not managed in the different systems where it ends up. Developing a circular strategy to identify what are the waste hotspots, what are those priority actions that can be taken to address and reduce waste. Followed up by then implementing that strategy through redesigning either products, manufacturing or supply chains, trying to reduce the production of plastics and the production of waste. And these 3 steps can be complemented by also financing plastic collection and recycling, so contributing to improving waste management systems for any waste that is still generated, and then ultimately sharing and engaging and disclosing the use of materials and sharing their vision with other stakeholders. This brings us nicely to today's topic, which is indeed focusing on that 4th element, which is exploring plastic action and specifically financing plastic action. So when we think about what financing plastic action means, we're really thinking about activities that focus on these 2 elements. So activities that are good for planet, that are focused on increasing plastic collection and recycling, and they're also activities that are good for people. So doing that in a way that can provide safe and stable employment and new job opportunities in a circular economy. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how organizations or why they may be interested in financing plastic action. There are many reasons. Among them, we have some highlighted here. For example, it could be part of an initiative to meet specific plastic targets. If an organization has started to measure their own plastic footprint, start to think about strategies to reduce the generation of waste and support additional activities beyond their value chain. They may also look at supporting plastic collection and recycling projects as part of that holistic strategy. They may want to be thinking about how to accelerate the circular economy in general. So really thinking about how they can contribute to the wider change in terms of how plastics are managed at the moment, ideally emphasizing or trying to prioritize activities in regions that are where they have their key markets, so maybe where products are sold, where waste is really not managed at all, and also trying to match activities with similar polymer types or packaging applications that they use. So really making sure that they're supporting or investing infrastructure that can help to address the plastics they may use, the plastics that are already in use, and the ones that we need to find solutions for. For other reasons, we can also think about the upcoming changes around different legislation and voluntary initiatives which are coming around the world. So for example, there are different extended producer responsibility schemes, increasingly requiring companies to take further action to address plastics, so including reducing at source, but also increasingly supporting the collection and recycling of waste management and waste management services to really fill gaps at both the upstream part of the plastics value chain and downstream. And then, of course, we can't forget that these projects also have additional benefits for the local communities where they're based. So with these plastic projects, they're not only producing and providing new employment opportunities, but also changing the health and safety requirements, also trying to change the status quo for people employed in the sites and people living nearby as well. So this is the why, and now when we think about how we might finance plastic action, there are different ways to do it, and today we'll focus on this initiative that is with plastic credits. So plastic credits are a relatively new environmental mechanism. They've been around for a few years now. They're essentially a financing tool that allows organizations to voluntarily fund projects that collect and recycle plastics. Projects can be focused on collection of plastic waste that otherwise wouldn't be collected, might end up in the environment, can focus on recycling activities to increase recycled content. And the projects undergo a certification process under independent standards to issue verified plastic credits. And this means that projects are able to really have a new revenue stream. So in addition to existing revenue streams, potentially selling physical materials they may process or recycle, they can also sell the plastic credits as a new income stream. And these credits can be bought by any public or private organization that wants to support this initiative. So if we go to the next slide, please, we can see that when we think of a credit, we're really talking about 1 ton of plastic waste that has been collected or recycled. So here we just make emphasis that there are currently 2 main plastic credit types, one that's focused on plastic waste collection, so diverting plastic waste from entering the environment or directly removing it, and then also the recycling credit. So I think if we move to the next slide, we can see a little bit more about the qualifications or the requirements behind the certification process. So I mentioned there that projects should be certified under independent standards. At South Pole, we currently work with the Fairer Plastic Waste Reduction Standard, which provides a consistent and reliable plastic project impact accounting framework, and also complies with ISO and ICL credibility principles. There's really 6 key things we wanted to highlight from these projects, and also plastic credit projects in general, that should always be present in a project. The first is making sure that the project and the impact is real, so that the activity, the collection or recycling has genuinely taken place. All credits are issued after this has been proven. The project must also be additional, so really showing that it goes beyond the status quo of activity. It must also be measurable, so possible to quantify and demonstrate that this activity has taken place with robust methods. Should be verifiable, so there should be an independent third-party auditor that verifies the plastic waste reductions. Should be permanent, so making sure there's not a risk of this plastic re-entering the environment, for example, and unique, so there should always be checks and safeguards to avoid double counting of any credit issued or credit sold as well. So I think if we move to the next slide, here we will show the different plastic project partners that South Pole is working with at the moment. So we of course have the plastic collection and recycling project by Taka Taka Solutions in Kenya, which will be our focus today. And we're also working with collection and recycling partners in Colombia and Europe. So I will leave it there today, and I'm happy to hand over to Daniel from Taka Taka Solutions to talk us a bit more through their project and activities.
Hi, thanks a lot, Emily. So yes, and yeah, hi to everyone. So we can move to the next slide. So I'm Daniel, the CEO and founder of Taka Taka Solutions. In case you're wondering, Taka Taka means waste in Kiswahili. So we can move to the next slide. So yeah, initially, let's just have a quick look at what is the waste problem in Kenya. So here are a few figures, and then I'll give a little bit more background to the story. So Nairobi Metropolitan produces about 4,000 tons of waste a day. Around 50% of that gets collected. The rest is dumped. And then about most of the waste is potentially recyclable, but actually very little gets recycled. And obviously that has massive impact on the main dump site, Dandora. It has, but also impact on all the smaller, like small and big dump sites where all the waste get litters. And then obviously in the area, especially around Dandora, with such density of waste, there's significant amounts of environmental pollution for the waste pickers and the community around the dump site. But maybe as a quick background to the waste sector in general. So the big differences to kind of developed countries or the US and Europe, as an example of that would be that one, in Kenya, there's not really municipal contracts. So there's neither a municipal operator nor is the municipality subcontracting a or a couple of companies for the waste. So it's an open market where almost anyone can collect and dump. So there's therefore very little control of where the waste goes. And that's why only about half of the waste actually goes to public dump sites. And I'm using the word dump sites on purpose because they're not licensed landfills. They're just open dumps that are managed by the city, but effectively are just dumps. And they're also therefore technically illegal. The other big thing or difference is that organic percentages are much higher here. So as a result, we're talking about 50–60% organics versus 20% again in developed countries. So which also has then a negative impact on plastics because there's just a lot more recycling. So if you combine the fact that the waste kind of goes everywhere, most of it goes to the dump site, because there's no municipal contracts, there's very little regulations, and as a result, there's also no refinancing abilities for infrastructure, which is why, unfortunately, in the medium term, it's also unlikely that there will be landfills or kind of publicly managed material recovery facilities, which is the term for sorting sites. The sector is going to stay like that, unfortunately, for a while. So if you take all these factors together, what does that mean for plastics? It means that basically today it's a cherry picking economy. So things are dumped. The high value items on plastics, which would be, rigid plastic PET bottles, are moved from the trucks, they're moved from the dump site, and everything else, because it's basically mixed together, it's very heavily polluted by organics, and the cost of obviously recovering waste after it's been dumped is much higher than if you did that at the beginning of the value chain. It just means that it's not viable to recycle the majority of plastics. And so many things like flexible packaging, which is about 50% of the plastic waste, and other materials don't really get recycled. So that's kind of the bleak overall picture here. So next slide, please. So then here's a quick overview of what we do with regards to plastics. So the project has targeted initially about 50,000 tons over 10 years. We are currently approaching a collection rate of about 5,000 tons a year, although we're looking to increase that in the future. And as you will shortly see, this is both a collection and recycling project. So next slide, please. So how does Taka Taka Solutions work? So it's important to know we are an integrated waste management and recycling company. So we're not just a plastic recycling company. So that shows in the way that if you start at the bottom left, we collect waste from different waste producers, commercial, residential, and industrial clients. So that waste then, instead of going to the dump site, which is what kind of everyone else does, we operate material recovery or sorting facilities. At those facilities, we have lots of women on conveyor belts sorting every piece of waste, and obviously significant parts of that are plastics. The materials then, the plastics go to our recycling plant, the organic goes to our composting plant, and other materials we don't recycle in-house go to third-party recyclers. So that's kind of one stream of where plastics come from. And then the second stream is that we also buy waste from waste pickers at dump sites. So there we basically pay waste pickers a price for materials. The sites are situated close to the dump site, so it's easy for the waste pickers to bring it. And then from there, and as I said, the material recovery facility, the plastics goes to our recycling plant. We currently have 2 of those, one for rigid, one for flexibles. The materials get further sorted, they get washed, they get crushed, they get pelletized, and then we take them back to, or the finished product goes back to plastic manufacturers. So next slide, please. So here just a few impact metrics. So generally our current capacity is about 700 tons. We're not utilizing that capacity, so we need to ramp that up. But at the same time, we're also increasing our capacity by next year. So we're just installing a very large flexible recycling plant, which will take our capacity up, as you can see. And then we're employing about 120 people at our recycling plants. If we include the buyback centers and our other operations, we're about at 700 employees. I think the important thing to mention about us, and I'll share more about that in the next slide, is that we really focus on the harder to recycle stuff that others do not do. The reason for that is also because, coming from the point of view of a waste management companies, we only entered recycling a few years ago. We kind of came at the problem from which materials do we not have a solution for, and those then naturally ended to be the harder to recycle ones. So that's then what we focused on, because we wanted to solve the problems for those material and those plastic material streams that there wasn't any other recycler, because we were already collecting that materials. So for example, if you look at the example of flexible packaging, that's about 50% of Kenya's plastic waste. It's about 25,000 tons a month production, and the current recycling rate is about at 1%. That's without our capacity. So that's why we focused on that. And similarly on thermoformed, or also called single-use plastic containers, similarly, the recycling rates were 0. So those are the material streams we initially focused on. And the reason why these materials are harder is because generally, one, they have a bigger surface area for every kilogram of plastic. So in the case of flexible, I mean, if you look at a supermarket or a garbage bag, it's just, they're very light, but have a lot of surface area. So as a result, there's lots of contamination potential. They have direct printing on the packaging. So the moment you melt them, they all tend to get dark, which is less attractive for manufacturers, because no one or most people don't like dark products. And because most of them have been in contact with food, unlike PET bottles that only have been in contact with liquids, there's also more contaminations from that. And because these materials are bulkier, generally you need bigger recycling systems through which those materials can run. So your cost of processing, both on a washing and a drying basis per unit, is a lot higher. So that's why both in Kenya and globally, these material streams have some of the lowest recycling rates. But those are the ones we focus on because, as I mentioned, kind of we came from the problem side, and those were the biggest problem. So yeah, also, as I mentioned, we currently have 2 washing and palletizing lines, and we have 2 sorting sites and about 6 buyback centers across the country where we buy the plastics from. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to quickly talk a bit more about each of kind of the about the 2 sources of waste. So the other one being the material recovery facility. So I think what we're really trying to achieve there in the medium term is not have waste reach dump site, because ultimately, from a waste management and an employment perspective, the best thing would be if waste never hits the dump site, because once it reaches the dump site, it's more contaminated. The working conditions are not good for waste pickers. The cost of recovery of material is higher. The material is much dirtier. So both from the kind of jobs you have at dump sites, although right now there are many, and the quality of the material and the ability to recover material from dump sites is a lot lower. So really, the kind of world we want to move towards in waste is not have waste reach dump site, but kind of get out as much of the recyclable materials, which ideally is as much as 90 to 95% from sorting site before it reaches the dump site, and then only have a very small percentage go to dump sites. So how are we doing that? So that's and that's also where the credit support is, by basically running material recovery facilities. At the moment, we manage about 90 tons a day of waste going through these facilities, and there you generally have better working conditions, you have lower recovery costs, and we're able to get much cleaner materials. So right now we have about 360 staff there. We sort more than 2,000 tons a month through these sites. And we have probably one of the highest recovery rates in the world, with an average between 90 and 95%. But the challenge to scale this is the dump sites in Kenya, because basically they're practically legal and just a dump, have a very low cost of dumping waste. So it's not that attractive for people to bring waste to a material recovery facility if the alternative, the dump site, is almost free. So we really need to, over time, right now we're only managing the waste that we collect ourselves, but what we want to do in the future is to scale material recovery facilities to a more municipal level and have other companies bring us their waste. So then it really starts replacing dump sites. But in order to do that, we need to get a lot more efficient, both on kind of how the cost of sorting the material needs to go down, and the level and the percentage of the sorted materials that we can valorize and sell needs to go up. And the combination of that, we believe over time can get us to a point that we can charge a very low gate fee that would make it attractive to other companies to take the waste to us instead of the dump site. And at which point I think we can really, at a scaled manner, look at changing the value chain from a collect to dump to a collect to sort kind of approach. And that's part of what we are kind of hoping to get support from plastic credits for. And I think it's also part what makes this project quite unique, because we're not just looking to extract waste out of the environment in the current system, but we're trying to build a better system where waste never reaches dump sites. Next slide, please. And then looking at the buyback centers, so coming back to or thinking about the previous slide, so obviously facing the reality that the majority of waste today is dumped, we also need to work on that kind of value chain that we're in today. And in that value chain, almost everything goes to dump sites. So we still want to recover that waste. And we also want to empower people as much as possible that are doing that. And I think the reality globally today is that waste pickers are are probably the strongest collection network in almost most developing countries for all waste. So they're essential to the waste economy, and they're also, for the work they're doing, should be treated and paid a lot better than they often are. So basically what we do is, one, we buy materials that almost no one else does. So already that gives waste pickers a new additional income stream that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So we're not just buying, say, PET bottles that they could have sold otherwise at a higher price. We're buying flexible packaging and single-use containers that otherwise wouldn't have a market. So I think that's probably the biggest impact. The other things that then we're trying to support waste pickers on, over and above buying these additional materials, is kind of trying to make their job more formal. So we do that by doing medical checkups. We give them protective equipment. We've set up now 6 kindergartens across Kenya where waste pickers can take their children to, or waste picker moms, so that we try to make sure they don't take them to the dump site. So those things I think have helped a lot, but I think it's also important to realize that ultimately the dump site is still a dump site. So we're making their jobs better, but it's still a very, very tough job. So yeah, so when we're looking about kind of how is this project different or additional, it's really the fact that, one, it's materials that we're buying from waste pickers that wouldn't have a market for them otherwise, and two, it's this array of social benefits that we're offering to waste pickers, so thereby trying to formalize their job more and moving them somewhat closer to how a job in a formal sector would look like. Then next slide, although we may already be at the end. Oh yeah, so quickly, just as a, I think this is the last slide, as an overview on the impact we've had so far. So I think when we look at jobs, we have about 730 full-time jobs and work with more than 1,000 waste pickers. And we generally, both for our own staff and waste pickers, pay significantly above industry average. We are increasingly, and actually the plastic credits have also really pushed us on that in a positive way, try to offer protective equipment, health checkup, kindergartens, both for staff and for waste pickers. We're trying to generally to employ a lot of women. So on average, we have 50% female employees, which is very high for the waste sector. We don't just do that because it's a good thing to do, but we've also generally noticed that women in Kenya are a lot harder workers and generally more reliable workers. So it works from both sides. In terms of infrastructure, we operate currently 2 material recovery facilities, 2 recycling plants, and actually at this point, it's 6 buyback centers across the country. One of them is actually also in Kenya's largest refugee camp, Kakuma. And then in terms of volumes, so we manage about 90 tons from our material recovery facilities a week, and about another, 90 tons a day. And then we manage about another 10 tons from the buyback centers daily. And then currently we're heading towards recycling and collecting about 5,000 tons of waste annually, of plastic waste, and trying to increase that further as we hopefully keep scaling our operations. So I think that's the last slide, if I'm not wrong, but maybe we go to the next one. Yes, that was it. And I think we're right on time. So thanks a lot, and looking forward to as many questions as possible.
Thank you, Daniel and Emily, and hi everyone. My name is Nicole, and I'm going to be moderating the Q&A. If you have not already seen, there is a chat in the GoToWebinar panel, the control panel, where you can use the questions function to put your questions in. We've already received a couple, but if you have any in the meantime, if any new ones pop up, then feel free to always put them in the document. But super interesting webinar so far. Thank you so much for all the insights. Maybe we can just jump right in. There's a question for Daniel here. And I think you've already touched upon this a little bit, but maybe to just do it one more time, make it clear for everyone. So how are Taka Taka's activities changing the way that waste is managed in Kenya? Maybe we can start with this one. Very broad, but sort of the key impacts that you have there.
Yeah, I think at a high level, especially answering the question towards plastic. So I think we are recycling plastics that otherwise would not be recycled. So that's flexible packaging, the majority, and also thermoformed single-use plastic containers. And we do that, one, through sourcing the waste from buyback centers and sourcing that from waste pickers, who we empower, not just from offering a market for these material and therefore a significant income stream, but also giving other kinds of benefits to them from protective equipment, kindergarten support, health checkups. And secondly, by also sourcing the second channel from our own material recovery facilities and trying to scale that channel, because we really believe that in the medium term, we need to change the waste stream is managed. So it shouldn't be collected to go to dump site. It should be collected to be sorted, where you can, where a lot more waste can be recovered under better working conditions and in a more environmental way. So by basically having those two sorting streams, we're trying to make the waste management space and the people operated in both in today's value chain and in tomorrow's value chain better.
Amazing answer. Thank you so much. And I think there's a lot of questions, of course, for you, Daniel, on the project itself. There's one more from Ryan. He says, from our experience, dump sites are rife with labor safety issues and often have children. How do you monitor or mitigate those risks?
I think the honest answer is there's no perfect way of doing this. I think, which is also why I've said from the beginning, we need to be cognizant that dump sites aren't a great place, and we can make it a better place. We cannot make it a great place. I think that's just the reality, and we need to be honest about it. So taking that reality into account, in our experience in Kenya, child labor surprisingly isn't a very big issue, but we're trying to mitigate that by paying enough high money and to the waste pickers, so they have enough income to not take their children there, and secondly, offering them subsidized kindergarten support so they have a place to take their children to. In terms of labor standards, we are giving out protective equipment. We're regularly going to the dump site and checking, but also there is a reality, that you might give a waste picker a pair of gumboots and protective equipment, and they will have sold it the next day because they need cash flow, right? I think so. We're doing as much as we can, but I think it's always good to just be honest that there isn't a perfect way to sorting all issues at the dump site. It's more about, making it better, but making it perfect, you ideally need to have waste not go to dump sites and employ the same people and many more at material recovery facilities.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks a lot. Maybe a question for Emily at this point. What is the process of working with South Pole to finance a project like this, like Taka Taka Solutions?
Good question. Thanks, Nicole. So indeed, if organizations are interested in supporting and financing these projects, the best way to start would be indeed to reach out to myself or Nicole, any of us in the call. And then we could discuss with you your needs, what you're looking for, and set up that process to find either directly support this project and understand the timelines that you have and the credits. But yeah, it's basically starts from reaching out and then we align with you in terms of what you need and the timeline, and then we can go from there. But it's usually fairly straightforward once we're in touch. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. Maybe if we stay on that sort of in that area, we also have the question from Henrik, what is the price of a plastic credit?
Very good question, Henrik. I think that's right now literally the multi-million-dollar question, because the concept of plastic crediting is so new. It's not like other markets where there is a really established price. at the moment, it's really dependent on the project itself and what the project needs in order to be able to operate and achieve the work that they're doing. That being said, we do see a range, say around 400 to 600 euros per ton of credit prices, really depending on the actual activity. So is it doing collection? Is it doing recycling? How much is it contributing to changing the waste management scenario? What sort of activities are they doing to also support workers and things like that? So all of these factors will affect the final price.
Amazing. And that actually leads right into another question, maybe this one for Daniel again, on the support. So how does Taka Taka support its staff and informal workers to have safe and stable jobs?
I think one, in terms of our staff, obviously it's a fully formalized, paying all government fees. You know, in the case of Kenya, there's actually a public pension scheme. There's a public health insurance scheme, which actually works quite well. We're doing health checkups for staff. They're getting PPEs. You know, we have various or started establishing a lot of internal health and safety committees, so things like that. With regards to waste pickers, as I mentioned, I think the answer is, to be honest, has a lot more shades of gray. Because yes, we do a lot of activities. We issue protective equipment. We pay high salaries. We offer kindergarten access for children. We have done medical checkups. But especially on the issue of PPEs, there is always a risk that some of them are sold off quite quickly. So I think that the mitigation factor there is by issuing them frequently, as strange as that sounds, and also kind of regular being in touch with the groups on the dump site, regularly issuing them and trying to kind of explain the benefits of, you know, having a somewhat safer working environment. But as mentioned earlier, there is no 100% easy fix for making dump sites a better working environment, because yeah, in an ideal world, waste wouldn't go to dump sites.
Amazing, thanks so much. And there's another question from Felipe. He's asking sort of on how does it work financially? What's the financial structure of the project? How does it work? You know, how are yields shared? How are prices established, etc.?
Yes, I guess that question is to me. So, I mean, generally the revenue stream you have in plastic recycling is that you're selling plastic pellets or granules back to plastic manufacturers, and those plastic manufacturers use those granules instead of virgin plastic. So that's a positive environmental impact, and then they pay for them. And because unlike in Europe, where there's certain mandates by the government on the percentage to be used, like it's now upcoming for PET, but I think by 2025, you know, there's no premium to be paid for recycled plastic. It's at a lower price than virgin plastic, and depending on the quality and how closer your quality is to virgin plastic, that can be anywhere from, let's say, 40 to 70% of the virgin price on the higher end. So that's kind of our only normal revenue source. And then basically you kind of start working backwards. I think the other important thing, as a side comment to earlier, why flexible packaging is so rarely recycled. If you recycle rigid plastic, you know, one of the biggest cost factors in recycling is the loss rate. So the dirt and other materials you wash off that don't constitute the plastic. In rigid, those are below 20%. In flexible packaging, they can be anywhere from 30 to 60%. So already your production costs are a lot higher because of higher surface areas and more dirt. So then you kind of work backwards, and you know, you need to find a price point that obviously is attractive for waste pickers and also makes the unit economics work. And I think this is where credits are super important, because they add extra revenue stream that then allows you to, you know, subsidize some of the long-term investment in the infrastructure that makes recycling of these difficult to recycle materials more quality and cost effective. It also allows you to pay a higher price for waste pickers, because while in theory you could argue, you know, if there's no one else buying it, shouldn't they just bring it to you? But also, you know, they also, because these single-use flexible packaging and containers are very light, it's very hard to collect them. So it's actually harder for them to collect them than some other plastics. So it's just a lot of effort, and people obviously also want a fair wage for that. So they need to have an incentive, and that incentive largely is financial. So basically the credits help raise the price for them, and it helps raise the investments in the infrastructure on collection and recycling to then make a higher quality product that over time then can get quality-wise closer to the virgin price, and then thereby enable a higher price, which is then again kind of trickled down. So it kind of starts a positive loop, but that loop needs to be kickstarted, and that's, I think, where credits come in.
Beautifully answered. Thanks a lot. And maybe now, sort of taking that, understanding what the funds do in a project like yours, looking at it from a company perspective, maybe a question for Emily. Why should companies consider supporting such projects through plastic credits, and what are the benefits of the plastic credit system for them as the buyer of such credits?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, for that question. I think it's a really good thing to bear in mind that really these, as Daniel said, these projects are in need of finance to really kickstart the alternative economics that will eventually flow by themselves, that really help us to address waste that's not already being managed. So I think from a company perspective, the motivation can either really be internal, say in meeting internal targets of showing how you are contributing to that wider goal, or they might also be external. You might be required by legislation coming soon to start to take action to show how you're contributing to improving waste management. You might also be willing to do so voluntarily, trying to show that you are contributing to this change in the status quo about how waste is managed more widely, and specifically plastics, that we know there is a lot of plastic that is not able to be collected or processed, and really we need to take action to fill that gap. So as I said, from a company perspective, it can be to meet specific reporting requirements, it can be voluntary. Why would they look at plastic crediting, the crediting mechanism itself? I think the main benefits there are really about the transparent system. So the framework around the crediting system builds in additional checks, additional transparency, and including checking things like additionality. Is this project that you're financing actually making a net positive benefit to how plastic waste is managed? There are therefore, with these different standards and methodologies, more of these checks and balances in place to show that the activity has occurred, that it's really going beyond the status quo, and then also providing a consistent monitoring framework for the project to check that also yourselves and other actors. So it's generally these additional impact assurances and this transparency network that which is why we suggest this method. And I think the other thing is, like, if a company is looking for especially projects that are not where you're based in different parts of the world, this sort of system can be helpful. Or if they're looking to support multiple projects, this is a kind of system that would enable them to do that as well.
Amazing, thanks so much. I see we're already at time. There's a few questions that we didn't manage to answer, but we'll make sure to follow up on those as well. And otherwise, maybe handing it back over to you, Emily, just for the closing.
Sure, thank you very much, Nicole and Daniel. So indeed, thank you very much to everyone who has joined us today in our webinar. We will be sharing the recording with everyone who's joined, and we will be sharing the link to that as well, so that it's possible to view afterwards. As Nicole said, we will be following up with any unanswered questions afterwards. Also, if you do have more questions for us, or you do wish to discuss more about Taka Taka solutions or plastic credits, you can also reach out to us. I believe our website and contact links are now in the chat as well, so you will be able to contact us through there. So just again, once more to say thank you very much for everyone who joined today, and we hope to stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.